Hello, welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I'm your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is Charles H. Packer, who is an attorney with the law firm of Hopkins & Carley. He's headquartered in Palo Alto. They also have an office here in San Jose. I've known Chuck for many years, so that's what I'm going to call him. And he is our community sponsor in Palo Alto for community television in Palo Alto. Chuck is the co-chair of the Family Wealth and Tax Planning Department at Hopkins & Carley. He's also a shareholder of the firm and a member of its executive committee. He graduated with his JD MBA degree from Santa Clara University in 1980 and was admitted to the California State Bar in 1981. The areas of his practice include estate planning, probate, trust and estate administration, and family businesses. Chuck also heads Hopkins & Carley's legal services for the Wine and Viticultural Society, for you wine aficionados out there. For the past several years, he's been the chairperson for the Jerry A. Kasner Estate Planning Symposium, sponsored by Santa Clara University School of Law. And he and his wife, Joan, have 2 children. In his spare time, whatever that is, Chuck likes to do some biking, and he is a volunteer coach for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society team and training competition. Or not competition, but anyway, the activity. They do some fundraising with biking. Today, Chuck and I are going to be talking about preservation of a family business. So, Chuck, thanks a lot for joining me today.
You're welcome, Mike.
Okay. So as I get started, this is a complex area. The fun thing to me is he and I aren't really going to be talking about taxes that much today. We're going to be talking about family dynamics. And we're going to be talking about issues more than solutions. This interview is intended to be the basis for a further conversation with your own advisors, possibly including psychological counselors. So anyway, so we'll get on with that. Okay, Chuck, here we go. So how is a family business different from other businesses, and what complexity does that bring to succession planning for them?
Well, family business, okay?
Yeah.
So the two may not necessarily blend together because there are a whole set of dynamics in each of those. Most of us view a business as being a for-profit entity, enterprise, but then you've got the family, and you've got some members of it that may be working in the business, and some members of it that aren't working in the business, and some members who are that shouldn't be working in the business. And this can lead to all sorts of issues, as you mentioned, that could create the need to bring in a skilled counselor to work with the family to figure out how to best keep the business moving forward so that there will be something for the next generation. There's an old adage that with family businesses go from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, meaning that the founder of it works hard and gets it up, and then within the 3rd generation after he or she, it's back down to shirt sleeves. They've managed to drive it into the ground or somehow otherwise screw it up. So that's what we try to prevent.
So the founders are usually involved in creation and building it, and then the later generations are often involved in consuming it.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Okay. So why may the persons, like you and me, usually consulted about family succession plans, why might they be ill-equipped to properly help develop such a plan?
Well, you and I, Mike, can run all the financial projections and figure out what the business might be worth if they were to look to sell it. or to give it to the junior generation. I can prepare all the documents to transfer the business from the senior generation to the junior generation in a tax efficient manner. But that's the mechanics of it. You and I are the mechanics, and we still have to deal with the family. We can handle the business side of it, but the family side of it, the soft and squishy, is where you really have to I think you have to focus more of your attention there. And I know I'm not really qualified. In some aspects I am to deal with that, but by no means am I a licensed counselor. You know, my partner and the firm founder, John Hopkins, actually was so interested in this area that he went back and became a licensed clinical social worker, I believe it was, so that he could work with families, or a psychologist, whatever it was, so that he could have that background on dealing with all the family dynamics and emotions, which have nothing to do with the business mechanics. And a lot of times, you know, the feuds that come out of the family business are really masking much deeper family issues, and I'm not qualified to handle that, nor do I think I want to handle it. So there's a lot to it. You know, it's in a lot of situations, the senior generation, the parents, the ones that maybe built the business or have moved it along very successfully, say, well, okay, we've got the 3 kids, and albeit 2 of them aren't involved in the business and 1 is, but they should all inherit a 1/3 interest in it. And unfortunately, what we see is once they're gone, once the senior generation is gone, the gloves come off because
Lost the referee.
Yeah, because the 2 non-participant children still want an equal share of the business, of the profits, if you will, or when the one that's in the business raises his or her salary, they get upset about it. Or maybe they own the real estate that the business is sitting on, and they want to raise the rent, but by them raising the rent, it's going to put the business on, you know, there's just all these issues that unfortunately don't get taken into consideration as often as they should at the planning stage. You know, John Hopkins used to say, fair but not equal.
Right.
So you've got to treat the kids fairly, but it may not be an equal division.
So one of the things is, too, of course, you're the attorney, but I think attorneys are basically trained, and what they're supposed to do is sort of represent a client.
That is correct.
And here we've got a lot of people
Right.
that are involved. So,
Right.
so it's hard to do it necessarily for the whole thing because we've got conflicts of interest all over the place
Yes.
here in many cases.
Yes.
So let's think again, or maybe get in a little more detail about some of the conflicts for family members that relate to the business that need to be considered. So I'll let you take it from here. What are some of the conflicts?
Well, you know, as I mentioned,
Yeah.
there could be conflicts vis-a-vis the distributions coming out, people feeling they're not getting what's due them. There could be conflicts having to do with who owns the assets of the business. Maybe the business is totally tiered, and each generation owns a different aspect of it, but they have to work together. So if one gets too greedy, they can't. You know, and so those that are sitting outside but still have stock certificates view the siblings or the family members, could be cousins, whatever it is, that are running the business as the plunderers. They're plundering the business because they're taking too much salary. They're just really enjoying their position too much, which obviously means they're doing something wrong. And then those inside the business looking out at their siblings or their cousins who own those stock certificates and are screaming, "Give me more money." Whereas these guys are the ones that are sweating, their blood, sweat, and tears. View them as the parasites. So you've got the plunderers and the parasites going at it with each other, and makes for a tough Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I would think. Well, how about some emotional issues to be considered for the family members? I think that, we like to think of this as the business is this profit-making entity, but I think part of the thing is we have a family identification in a sense with the business. We said the family business, and so the family is identified with the business itself. So maybe we could sort of talk around that issue a little bit.
Well, yeah, so the business, let's say, been in the family for multiple generations, and everybody just assumes that it's going to continue to pass down. And as I mentioned earlier, in many instances, the children aren't qualified to work in the family business, but by virtue of their being a member of the Lucky Gene Club, if you will, they are going to work in the business and maybe be quite highly compensated, but they shouldn't. They shouldn't be there. In my own family, my father had a small business, and my youngest brother actually went to work with him. But the deal was, he had to go work for somebody else in the industry first, and basically cut his teeth somewhere else before Dad would hire him into the family business. And for the others of us, that was a certain amount of validation that the kid could get a job and hold a job and do it, as opposed to, I've worked with family businesses over the last 30 years where I've walked in and met little Johnny, who's got some big title and a big desk and a very nice salary and all that. And I don't know that if Johnny had walked into the McDonald's on the corner, he would get a job. Because totally clueless. And the only reason he's got that job is because of the family. And if there were some third parties involved in it, there was no way that Johnny would be there. So the dynamics are very interesting.
Yeah. So and the other thing is that we're dealing in a sense with symbolic things here. So in other words, and we've talked about this in my own family. Anyway, that money, in a sense, can be seen as a symbol of love from mom and dad, especially if somebody's getting a bigger share than the others, then obviously mom or dad must love them best because they're the ones that are getting it. And there may be situations, again, family members just not getting along, so they have these dysfunctional relationships, and then they're supposed to work together in this business, and even then, if they're not working together, again, we're getting this conflict that's happening because we've got the insiders and the outsiders. And so, anyway, it gets difficult for businesses really to do well, I think, long term with these family dynamics.
Unless, all too often, Mike, talking about death and dying is a taboo subject.
Oh, that's another.
So the parents never really want to sit everybody down around the table and talk to them about what their plans are. When we die, this is what's going to happen with the business. This is what we're going to do with the other assets. And that doesn't mean we love you any less, that you're not getting the business. You're going to get the real estate, you're going to get this, you're going to get that. But you have no qualifications to run the business, whereas your sister, who's been in the business since she graduated college, does. And that doesn't mean we're necessarily giving her something bigger or better, because the continued existence of that business is now going to depend on her expertise and stewardship. So, but these conversations have to happen. And as we were talking about early on, maybe that's where you need to have a counselor there to help facilitate those discussions and get across what mom and dad are trying to accomplish and why they're doing it. So it's just a very, very emotional subject.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, since you brought up bringing the psychologist again to the table, why don't we move ahead a little in that area? What should you look for in finding someone to help in this?
There are people that focus their practice on, I'll say, the psychology of money. Either the sudden wealth syndrome or the family businesses, and there's actually some associations that one could seek out and find these people. I want to say it's like attorneys for the family business or something like that, and I'm not sure if that's the exact name, but if you were to go to the website, you'd see ancillary professionals that are involved in it, or I mean, there's folks that have written books on it. A number of them here in the Bay Area, up in Napa and San Francisco, and some people on the faculty at Santa Clara University that work with families in this area. It's not just your regular family therapist who can take on this this role.
Okay. Well, what about the key employees who aren't family members? So what sort of conflicts do they have?
Well, so if there's a chief operating officer, CFO, or something like that, who is an important part of the business's success, and they see the kids over here circling, waiting for the senior generation to either pass or to give the business to them, and they're thinking, that kid doesn't know a darn thing, and he's going to come in and be my boss. The senior generation, has to recognize these people and incentivize them to stay. And I don't know whether it's through stock, or whether it's through compensation, or whether it's through some sort of a phantom stock tracking plan to, that tracks the success of the business. But you want to recognize that and make sure that those people remain happy. Because if they're not happy, no matter how hard the next generation tries, if they lose senior team members, it can be devastating for the business. It could be a senior salesperson who has all the contacts. So you got to be really careful.
Okay. So, is there a process that you can use for this family business succession planning? What would the process look like?
First, it's a recognition that there's something needs to at least be discussed. Like I say, whether it's around the table or on a family retreat or something, and you want to bring the major issues to the forefront. You want to define, what are the family goals? What's the business goals? Where do we want to be with this? Are we looking just to position ourselves to sell it and everybody gets their cash and goes their own separate ways, or are we trying to make sure that the business goes on for a number of more generations? So, you can set up family councils, family boards, but if you do that, I think you also need to have some outside
facilitator.
Well, not even that. I'm almost saying, I hate to use the term because you have to have some outside grown-ups on that board, if you will, that understand how the business operates. Maybe it's you who's been the CPA for the company for the last 40 years or whatever it is, or me, so that we know how the business ran and how mom and dad ran it and all that stuff. But that we get a vote so that the three kids sitting there don't deadlock each other. You know, now we obviously don't have stock in the company or whatever, but mom and dad could still set it up that we are members of that board of directors for so long, to provide guidance to the kids to get them over the hump and into a smooth rolling stage. And you know, you have to discuss with the kids the reality of it, and what happens if they can't work together, and if you can't sell the business, or you know, if there's so much fighting and everybody in the community knows about it, nobody's going to want to touch that business. It's going to be a fire sale. So you really have to. Everybody has to cooperate and work together and put on a unified front with it. So
I'm just thinking that, you know, some of these kids, groups of kids that we're talking about, may be in their 50s and 60s and 70s.
Oh yeah.
Because mom and dad have held on to the control of this stuff, you know, into their 90s or whatever.
Right. No, there's been some major cases in the estate area of family-held businesses, closely held businesses, where you know, the trustee held on to the stock because that's what the mandate from the senior generation was, and the stock's just going down and down and down, and everybody gets sued and everybody's unhappy, or the non-participating cousins are seeing the ones that are in there working their behinds off, succeeding and making decent salary, but they're not getting the dividends that they wanted, so they decided to sue the business, which is nothing but a distraction to everybody else. So then you're not only dealing with outside market forces, you're dealing with the internal, you know, the parasites. So, you know.
So when and how should a business owner get started with this family succession planning? How does they come about getting started? Maybe.
Well, I think that sooner rather than later, you know, none of us, while we may not plan on retiring in the near future, that would trigger a succession plan, we just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I think that if this is something that we view as a family business rather than a business, starting that succession planning earlier rather than later is more important, because you want to start putting the mechanism in place and educating the children and setting their expectations. You know, it could be very early on with, you know, if you want to come join the family business, Mike, when you're older, I'm expecting you to get an education in these fields. You just can't go off to college and study philosophy and come back and be a member of the management team here. I need you to have a background in finance and this and that. I need you to have a background in marketing and IT, and this is my vision for the business, is you guys are going to run it, but you're going to have the appropriate job skills to do it. So earlier rather than later.
So when are you seeing clients get started in this process? Have you
generally later in the process, later on the horizon than optimal.
What seems to be motivating them to come to see you about it?
It could be the death of a friend who had a similar type closely held business, and they see what disarray happens afterwards. It could be they start to see their own mortality. could be that they've been approached by third-party buyers, and they want to discuss whether, what are the pros and cons of keeping the business for the future generations, or selling it now and taking the money. So there's all sorts of motivators that bring them to the table.
Okay. So we probably have, well, let's see, we have a couple minutes. When should the sale of the business be considered? When would that seem to?
Well, if it's apparent that none of the family members have an interest or the skills to continue the business, then I think it would be appropriate to start looking into the sale of the business. In many instances, though, I've worked with families where they weren't considering selling the business, and somebody came to them, and then it's, well, what do we do? Well, you can
Take the money and run.
take the money and run, or tell them you're not interested and wait it out and see what happens. But that then does start to plant the seed that maybe they should be getting the business in the right shape for a buyer.
Okay.
Clean up the books a little bit.
Okay. Well, Chuck, I want to thank you for coming and discussing this. I think it's a fascinating area and an important one, and it's a difficult one, really, for families to deal with, because, especially for the founders, that a
Yes.
big part of their identity is quite often tied up in the business.
Yep.
Folks, hope we've given you some things to think about. We'll see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.